Okay.
Welcome, everyone, to the Fantasy Baseball Beat podcast. If you've listened to our other podcasts, you know we're trying to get beat reporters to come on and give us their takes on the teams they cover as we try to gain every possible edge for you to play in fantasy baseball. Tonight, we have a very special guest joining us, but first, let me introduce you to my very talented co-host, Carlos Marcano. Carlos, what's up, my friend?
All good, Mike. All good. Very excited to talk to our guest today because I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people really interested to know what he has to say. So let's get it rolling, man.
I am for sure, too. Our other host, Chris Torres, has this thing called a family, and duty called tonight for him and his wonderful wife and kids, so he's not going to be joining us. But tonight, you'll get to listen to me and Carlos talk to the one and only legendary Scott Merkin. Scott Merkin is covering the White Sox for, I think, more than 20 years, Scott, right? And
21st year, yep.
21 years, and is one of the eminent beat reporters in MLB. So, Scott, thanks for making time for us tonight. You can find Scott on the Twitterverse at Scott Merkin with a K, at SCOTTMERKIN. If you're not following him, I suggest you change that immediately. Scott, how's it going tonight?
Good. I have to say up front that when I did play fantasy baseball years ago, I think it was called rotisserie baseball when I played. I was not very good. So we'll see if I can. Hopefully, I can help the other people to be better than I was.
I'm sure that you do fine, and that you probably win most leagues that you're in now, just because of the access that you have to everybody. But
no, I don't.
Anyway,
I stopped playing pretty much. It was just I played fantasy football a lot, and it just became obsessive. I'd sit there and I'd sit for 3 hours and look at like ESPN GameCast before I even had like Red Zone, and I'd get annoyed because they were at the 2, and they'd give it to some fullback who never scored instead of the tailback that I had, or the receiver I had would go like 50 yards with the catch and stop at the 2 and then lose a touchdown points. Yes. So I'd get all annoyed. I remember one year when Priest Holmes was at his peak. I had him, and I started like 19-0, and I got to the semis, and he unfortunately, I'm sure he felt more unfortunate than I did, but then got hurt, and that killed my team. So 19-0, and I didn't win the championship. What can you do?
It's funny. I only play fantasy football just because it kills time until fantasy baseball starts again.
Yeah, gotcha,
I'm not any good at it. That's for sure.
I have some friends who do like fantasy college football, like not even so much fantasy, but like they have 10 people and they just go through and pick players until they're done picking for 10 rounds or whatever. So
I can barely remember. I can barely remember my name on college. Sure was. That's
right.
For sure. Old J.J. McCarthy from outside of Chicago here.
Yeah, so. Nazareth Academy. Nazareth until he went to IMG, but Nazareth still lays claim to him. I think he was there 3 years before he left to go to finish at IMG.
Yeah, I think you're right. He was actually the starting quarterback. I live in Batavia, and I got my Batavia Bulldogs hat on, and they beat Batavia in the finals. I think in 2018, if that is that right. So anyway,
I started my first 8 years. I covered prep sports. Loved covering prep sports. It was great. Right out of college, and so I still pay attention. So I saw Batavia had a nice. They're like Providence. They had a decent season, and they had a really nice tournament, a nice playoffs, and then lost a really good Mount Carmel team. Obviously,
yeah, they ran into a buzzsaw on Saturday. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. So anyway, well, Scott, that kind of tells us a little bit about where you've been. So tell us a little bit, if you could, before we get started, about your start in the industry and how you found your way into the baseball realm.
Well, that's how I started. I started for a place called the Star Publications, not to be confused with the tabloid The Star, which I'm not even sure if it exists anymore. I covered preps, for, I don't know if people know the area, but New Lenox, Mokina, Frankfurt, and then also Harvey, Thornton, Thornridge, South Holland, all those schools in those areas. Had a great time, learned a lot, did everything from columns to game stories to features, layout, supervised people. It was just a great hands-on experience. I ended up at the Tribune eventually, was kind of a GA writer for the paper and chicagosports.com. After left there, started with MLB.com in 2003. I always go by like how many years I've had each manager. And I had just 1 year at Jerry Manuel before Ozzie came in, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, that's wild. That's really cool. You have a lot.
It's a great company. It's so well run. I mean, I just am impressed all the time by how well run the focus our company has, and just great staff. I mean, just everyone we have is quality on our staff. It's very cool.
That's awesome. It makes it sound like it's a pretty good place to work, which makes a heck of a lot of difference when you're working as much as you are. So let's just jump right in. Obviously, we know the White Sox did not have the year that many people had anticipated that they were going to have in 2022. Can you kind of give us an overall assessment of, what went wrong? I think a lot of people kind of have an idea what went wrong, and maybe also a little bit about what went right.
Yeah, there wasn't a ton that went right. I mean, off the top, what went right was Dylan Cease. I mean, Dylan Cease was tremendous. He developed into a true ace. He was the number 2 vote getter in the AL Cy Young this year behind Justin Verlander, who was amazing, obviously coming back from Tommy John at age 39. Dylan had one of the most powerful pitches in baseball in his slider, but really was, I think Ethan Katz, pitching coach, summed out how he just kind of understood game plans better, just understood everything. Just, it was another year for him under his belt, and he was tremendous. He was tremendous. Michael Kopech had a good first year as a full-time starter. He had, obviously been in the majors in a kind of a hybrid role, starter and reliever, but as a full-time starter, he had a good first year. Jose Abreu was his typical self, except for, a drop in power, but otherwise very productive. Second in the American League in hits. Andrew Vaughn had a good year, although seemed to, kind of for a second straight year, kind of tired out at the end. And they're hoping, I think, not playing out of position in 2023, moving to first base now, will help him solve that issue. But yeah, it was probably, just judging by the fan base that I've, interacted with in the 21 years, is the most disappointed I've seen the fans, because this is a team that people thought, this is the kind of the prime of the rebuild. This is the window is open. And this is a team that some people picked could be World Series contender based on their talents, and they finished 81-81. So I mean,
right.
It didn't even make the playoffs, and they added a playoff spot, right? And they still didn't even make the playoffs. And it was just, Tony was good by the media. Tony La Russa, I enjoyed covering him. There were moments, obviously, but you have moments in every job and every situation. He just was not the right fit for this team, 2022 or prime moving forward. I'm glad he's healthy. That's the key thing. Absolutely. Much more important than baseball. He's got a family and everything, so that's what matters. But now they have Pedro Grifol in there, and it just, the team didn't hit for power. They didn't play good defense. The pitching was a little inconsistent here and there, although, the bullpen was pretty solid overall. And it just was not and they didn't stay healthy. That's the biggest thing, is they did not stay healthy. I mean, you can look at almost every guy on that team. Anderson was on the IL for a considerable amount of time. Yohan Moncada started the year on the IL. Yasmani Grandal was coming off knee surgery, and with the lockout last offseason, didn't have a chance to work with, with the team and kind of, getting that set and rehabbing his way back. Now, and he had a, very rough year. Now this offseason, he's working fully healthy in the offseason. So he's ready to go in what will be the last year of his contract with the Sox. Eloy had an injury, early on in Minnesota. Luis Robert missed the end. Yeah. So, I mean, you take these guys off any team. Giolito had an off year pitching-wise overall, but you take that kind of trouble on any team, even the deepest of teams, and you're just not going to succeed. You're not going to do very well.
Yeah, it looked like everything that could go wrong just did.
Pretty much. Yeah, they're a better. I mean, I don't know if they were a World Series contender. Let's be honest. In this rebuild window opening, they have exactly 2 playoff wins, not 2 series wins, 2 playoff wins total. So, not exactly saying, okay, this is the team that's going to do it this year. But they're better than a 500 team. This should be a playoff team. With this group they have now in the division they're in, no offense to Cleveland, who was unbelievable and so much fun to watch this year. No offense to Minnesota, who's kind of always in the running. But in this division, they should, be in the playoffs every single year with the group they have. So it was a real disappointing year in 2022.
Yeah. But definitely there were some bright spots. Like, for example, Lynn and Hendriks was still,
Yeah, I forgot about Liam. Yeah, Liam was great.
At the end, and even Lance Lynn, he did, a pretty acceptable job, even with its ups and downs. So do you think they will continue to perform, or even maybe take a little step forward in that regard?
Yeah, Lance hurt himself, and I believe his last or second to last spring train outing, it was a night game in Goodyear. And it was a day that was Garrett Crochet hurt himself in a night game in Goodyear. Mm-hmm. Lance hurt himself on a Sunday afternoon, I want to say in Scottsdale, and had knee surgery. And it took him a while to, really kind of get back into rhythm. And he got hit pretty hard. He had a 7 ERA 5-6 starts in, and then the last, I want to say 10 or 11 starts he made, it was like 2.5 ERA. More along the lines of what you expect from Lance Lynn. So
right.
I think he'll be fine this year as long as he stays healthy. And I very much an oversight on my part that Liam Hendriks again was one of the best closers in baseball. I had a few moments. Everyone remembers the Cleveland game where they were winning big in the 9th, and Josh Naylor hit the game-tying homer, and then I believe hit a game-winning grand slam in the 10th against Ryan Burr. And that was when Ryan had the great quote. I mean, it's an old quote, but he said, sometimes you're the bug, sometimes you're the windshield, and tonight I was the bug, So, but Liam was great. The bullpen overall was very good. Kendall Graveman was very good. Bummer when he was healthy. He was another guy who dealt with injuries, all year. So, yeah, I think that, I don't see any drop-off from these guys. And I think, if anything, Lynn healthy and being together for full spring training is going to help everyone on that team.
Scott, you brought up the injury issues. Obviously, anybody who was watching the Sox this year saw that just a staggering number of games missed by their core group of guys. Do you see the injuries to Eloy and Luis Robert and Tim Anderson as being like freakish accidents? And do you think that they're getting an injury-prone label, or do you think that that's unfair?
Well, it's interesting because Rick was asked by a reporter, or was addressing something about the reporter early in the season after Eloy got hurt about Eloy being injury-prone. Rick Hahn, of course, the GM for the White Sox, and kind of bristled at that. But I don't think, it's not a negative, and maybe it is a negative connotation, but no one is saying Eloy doesn't work. No one is saying Eloy isn't a supremely talented kid who seems to really enjoy playing baseball, has fun at the ballpark, which is, half the battle in your job, as anyone in the world will tell you. That's my parents always told me,
Right.
It's something you have fun at. But, if you get hurt every year, you're a little injury prone, right? I mean, it doesn't mean you're bad or anything like that. It just means it happens. So I think the Sox are working now. They've added a new sports science department, which they added, or a director, someone in charge of it, which they talked about today in the Zoom about, the new coaches. So they're doing all they can to keep these guys healthy, because that's an issue. You have, and give Eloy credit. I mean, Eloy hurt himself, busting his butt. I was at the game in Target Field. Happened to lost my credit card that weekend, as a matter of fact, but eventually got it back. Busted his butt on in a game where they were down, I think, already, trying to beat on an infield hit, and it looked awful. And then to see him the next day trying to even sit down and just adjust himself, walking in on, sitting on the chair, adjust himself on the chair, walking in with those crutches, I thought, well, there's no chance we'll see him again this year. I'm sorry, not next year. The rest of 22. And that was May something, right? Not only did I see him again, but he was really good, when he came back.
Was.
So give him a ton of credit. If you're going to say he's a little injury prone, that's okay, but you're also got to give him credit for kind of busting his butt in that rehab, getting himself ready to come back as soon as he possibly can, and
for sure,
being good once he came back. And he was the same in 21 when he came back. I think he had a little bit of a rough finish, but he can. People have said to me they think that maybe his high point could be like a Yordan Alvarez, and maybe now that he did some work at DH last year, which he hated, before he had to do it last year because of the injury. He wanted no part of DH. And I get it. He's a young player. Why would you just want to do that,
Right.
But maybe now that he found success doing that and found a little bit of a routine, he'll be better suited going in to play a lot of time there this year, and that'll help him even more. So, but put it this way, I think as many things as went wrong last year, and this is what Pedro Grifol told us. We met with him in the first press conference. This team had so many injuries, so many, issues with underperformance here and there, or just not doing things well. And they still finished 81 and 81. So that doesn't happen unless you have a lot of talent. Now, again, they beat up on some not great teams, but that's what really good teams do, right? You beat up on the teams that aren't great, and you kind of break even against the teams that are excellent. So, give them credit that it was a rough season, things didn't go well, and they still had enough talent to get to 500.
Yeah, you gotta beat the team that's in front of you, right? I mean, they don't make the schedule. That's the way it really goes. Can you talk a little bit about? I know one of the things that a lot of Chicago fans and a lot of fantasy players are really interested in Luis Robert. Obviously, the stolen base and power upside is almost unparalleled, probably in major leagues right now, except for a few guys. Can you talk a little bit about what happened with him in the second half, Scott? I don't know how comfortable you feel going into that, but there were a lot of questions as to why he wasn't on the IL when he was clearly swinging with one hand with the wrist injury. Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be healthy for the spring? And do you think he'll be ready to go?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't talked to him, and they really haven't talked about him since I think we met with him. I think it was in San Diego, maybe that last road trip, and if not, it was the last home series against Minnesota. I think he tried to play through it. They were still in that race. As great as Cleveland was to kind of outkick their coverage and the prediction is what they were going to be for a team. They were right there, and until they lost 4 in a row at home to Cleveland, and then they weren't right there anymore.
Right.
So Robert tried to hang in there, but here's the thing with Robert is he's a 5-tool talent. There's no question about it. You watch him and see. He hit that home run, the grand slam in Minnesota, where it went like 475 feet. You see how good the one he hit in the playoffs against Oakland during the pandemic season, pandemic shortened season. You see how good he is. He's already been recognized as a Gold Glove caliber center fielder.
Right.
He can hit 300. He can steal 30 bases. But he has not played 100 games in the major leagues yet in the season. So what's the key thing there? Keep him healthy. And that's a big priority for the White Sox. And again, they'll be helped by, the pandemic we're still dealing with whatever out there. We understand that's part of it. But there's no restrictions from that, like there was in 20. There's no lockout issues like there was in 21. I'm sorry, I'm off 1 year, right? No, that's right. Yeah, that's right. 20 and 21.
You got it.
Yeah. And there's no lockout issues there was in 22. And so, you have a regular off season and a regular season to get to work and see what you can get of it. And I guess 21, they were coming off. What I was thinking of is 20 was the pandemic shortened season. 21, you're ramping up after that short season for a full season. And then 22, you had going into it the lockout issue, which was settled eventually.
Right.
So, and they did play 162. So now you have normal contact with the team, normal spring training for what it looks, and go from there. So yeah, Robert is a guy I'd take on every fantasy team, and you just hope that he stays healthy and can play 130 games, and I think the numbers will correspond.
Yeah, I agree.
And he's still been taken in the 4th round, so people is still into him. And maybe not a first round value as last year, but I mean, 4th round is still pretty rich,
Yeah.
So I want to go back to a couple of players that might be more on the getting a lot of talk from the fans and people alike, and those are Yasmani Grandal and Yoan Moncada, especially Moncada, who doesn't seem to click yet into what people is expecting from him, right? So this season was a low season for them. What do you think happened to them last year, and in your opinion, and can they rebound from there?
Yeah, I think first off for Moncada, last week of the season, he's ready to go. He didn't have a great spring, but no one ever got to the Hall of Fame on great Cactus League numbers, obviously. Right. And then the last week of the season, we're told that he's sidelined because of a oblique, not a big deal. And then we get to where the season opened last year. Why am I blanking now? It was on the road. What the heck? It really is immaterial for the story, but it's bothering me that I can't think of where they opened. Detroit. They opened. They opened Detroit. So they opened Detroit, and we get there for the workout day, and they say he's on the IL. And was gone for a good portion of April. So it's it's a tough injury to fight through. I always use this story because I remember Adam Dunn the year in 2012, when Robin's first year when the Sox were fighting for the AL Central title, and I think we're in first, 177 days. He had an oblique strain in that last month and played through it because they needed him. And he said he didn't really feel totally right until like December of that offseason. It's a tough injury, and especially, swinging and everything else. Moncada is still a stellar defensive player. He's been up and down offensively. I think, he'll benefit from the change with Grifol in there. And I think, not everyone is pump your fist, make jokes in the dugout type of guy. He's just a laid back dude. Doesn't mean he doesn't care. I think he cares very deeply. He plays hard. He trains hard. He's also just had some injury issues. And then oblique really just kind of set him back at the outset. And with Grandal, after he came back from the knee surgery in 21, had a stretch of like 30 games where he hit the ball as hard as I think anyone I've seen in covering this team for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And he even the outs were just line drives at someone or great plays taking away a hit. I think he may benefit a little bit this year from the shift changes. I think he lost some hits because of that the last few years. But again, we saw him at a charity event the Sox had where he was gracious enough to help out. and he talked about he's doing work with the Blackhawks trainer.
Yeah,
or the conditioning director. I don't want to get his title wrong, which I already did. And he was very upbeat. It's a healthy off season for him. There's no rehab work to be done besides training for the season. At the point that we talked to him, he already put in like 30 sessions. Yeah, so he's ready to go. It's his last year on this 4-year, $73 million deal. And I'm not even talking about him coming back to the Sox. Assuming he wants to keep playing, he needs to have better numbers than what he put up last year. But I mean, this is a guy who knows how to play the game, who has a very meticulous schedule, an intense work ethic, and knows how to win. I mean, last year I think was the first time in 8 years where he hadn't been in the playoffs. Now that's partially being part of good teams, but good players kind of gravitate towards good teams, right? I mean, no offense to anyone else, but a guy like Jose Abreu, you weren't going to see him sign with a second division team because he wants to win, and he's going to help a team win because he's that good a player. So yeah, I wouldn't. I think Grandal had some issues behind the plate, but I think healthy, being able to work on everything, being able to work with the organization, he'll be ready to go. And you have a pretty decent. Now I've mentioned in a couple of stories they could add another catcher because of the fact that if you don't know, Grandal is coming back after this year. Are Sebi Zavala and Carlos Perez, your immediate future, or do you go out after next season and find someone else to pair with them? If Grandal's not back. So all interesting situations to figure out kind of as the offseason goes on.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that and pick your brain on those a little bit too. But, you brought up Jose Abreu. And by the way, your piece on him that came out, I think either last night or this morning, was outstanding.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It was really, really well done for what it's worth from this amateur guy over here. My 12-year-old son, notwithstanding, who is a huge Jose Abreu fan, and I had to break the news that Jose signed with the Houston Astros yesterday. Does this create a pathway for Andrew Vaughn to play first base full-time? And the reason why I ask that is because I think it's a foregone conclusion that a lot of people feel that they let Abreu walk because they want Vaughn to play first base and stop shuffling him around in the outfield. As a corollary to that question, Scott, where does Gavin Sheets fit into that?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned your son. I have a really good friend who lives downstate whose son is a baseball diehard and actually a pretty good little player at 6 or 7 years old. And he was a big Harrison Bader fan and had the same reaction when the Cardinals traded him to the Yankees. Couldn't understand why the Cardinals would do that. But, yeah, I mean, Jose is an icon, right? He's an organization staple. He'll have his number retired someday. He's third all-time in home runs, which shows you the Sox didn't hit a lot of home runs in their career because he's only been there 9 years. But also shows you how well he did over his 9 years. It's Thomas and Konerko who are above almost everyone in a lot of categories, and then it's Jose at 243. Not only was he a great player, great leader, and yes, I know, this is the caveat. People always say, well, he's a great leader, and they won 2 playoff games during his time. But not all him. It's not all his responsibility. People were talking about how, he hit like 1 home run over his last, whatever it was, 40 games last year. Okay, but he was hitting the ball. He was playing every day. Yeah. The guy's there every day. This is a guy who ran full force into Hunter Dozier, who goes about 6'4", 260 off the top of my head. And that would have, knocked people out for months, most people. And he played the next night. Right. So, I mean, he was a pretty amazing guy in that it was all about the team. You kind of saw him develop. He kind of figured things out a little physically. You see the picture of him when he first joined the team in 2014. He wasn't heavy. He was just a bigger dude. And even he joked about that when I asked him this year during an interview, like, what was different between now and then? He said, well, I'm a little thinner, And I think it's sad, but I think it happens, right? Rick talked today about the Zoom about he was looking at some picture on Twitter where Joe Creedy was in a Twins uniform and Burley was in a Marlins uniform and Frank was in an A's uniform. And, people leave. That's what happens in the game. I think Jose probably, he didn't really say this, but I think just the difference of his tone from last time versus this time in the free agency, I think he was ready to go. I think he was ready for a change too. I always thought Houston was the perfect fit. Absolutely. They're a great team. Yeah. I think Gurriel was a very nice player for them. Gurriel won a batting title 2 years ago. He's one of the best defensive first basemen in the game. But I think Jose gives you that and power on top. And I think Jose will crush it with those Crawford boxes. And I think Jose will focus less on the on base, which I think he tied a career high with 383 OBP last year, and look more for the, to just hit the ball hard places again. I think he's going to be great there. But the flip side is with the Sox roster construction, now you can put that on the Sox that it's not great roster construction or just the way things worked out. you have a lot of guys who can play first base or DH. Eloy Jimenez, Yasmani Grandal, who's going to catch too, obviously. Andrew Vaughn, Gavin Sheets. And, Andrew Vaughn worked his tail off. Andrew Vaughn was thrown into the outfield in 2021 when Eloy hurt himself on a, kind of misguided attempt at a spring training home run. And all he had played left field, except maybe a few, batting practice drills, was during the alternate side in 2020. And did what he could. He wasn't a great outfielder, but he was developing. He was getting a little more comfortable. Same with Gavin Sheets. I thought Gavin had maybe a little better feel for the outfield than Andrew did, and he was working at it too. But I think, I know Rick and the White Sox believe guys not out of position is going to make this team even better. So Andrew Vaughn was drafted as a first baseman. That's what he's going to be now. The Sox are not adding a first baseman. He's going to be at first. And again, Eloy enjoys playing left field. He was, at times okay, but wasn't a great left fielder. So he's better off as a DH. Now, if you could have trusted Eloy and left, you probably could have had Jose stay, right? I don't know if I don't think they're going to play Jose. I don't think they were giving Jose 360. That's what he ended up here, 358, whatever he got from Houston. But you could have had Jose and Vaughn split time at DH and first base along with, Gavin Sheets. But Eloy is going to be mostly DH. So it makes sense. In some ways, it does make sense that he left because of the roster construction. In others, you look at it and say, well, if you're trying to win, you want to keep your best guys. And Jose clearly was that, right? So you just move on. And now you see with Jose gone, what do they do to fill the spots? They still have left field open. They still have second base. They have, internal candidates for both. But, it looks like Oscar Colas is going to be in right. So now what do they do to fill the spot? Do they kind of piece it together? Or do they go out and make a trade or make a statement and sign, some maybe, slightly upper tier guy to play left field? So, it's a weird day, and fans were, for the most part, not happy, and understandably so. The guy was an absolute icon. But, even the press conference, another press conference is all about Houston today, but you could see he had moved on. It was time for, and that's it's like people who complain about, Tony last year. Okay, it didn't work. Not a good season, but he's not the manager anymore, so you got to focus on now. You got to focus on what's happening now and what the team can do going forward.
And thinking about that, we have.
Can you guys stop it? Is it okay? I just want to get something to drink. My throat's a little dry.
Sure.
Is that you allowed? I'm not going to stir it up, right? Okay.
No, for sure.
All right, hang on 1 second.
Don't stop recording, because if you do, then you have to send a new link. We learned that the other day. We'll just have to edit it.
No worries.
You're going to ask about Colas in the outfield?
Yeah, I was just brought them in and jumped to the starting pitching.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
No worries. If you need you need to do it again, just don't worry. We just
thank you.
Did it. No worries. I just wanted to. You brought Colas in for a moment there, and wanted your opinion if he might be ready for getting the duties on the right field on 2023, or maybe it would be better to go. There are a few high caliber guys out there, Peralta, Bellinger, Benintendi. Which would be a better match for the team?
Yeah, I think you could have Colas in right field and still add a guy like Benintendi to play left field, but I think Colas is going to be the right fielder this year. I really do. I think for a while I thought maybe he wouldn't be out of spring training, but I think he's going to be. I think he is going to be the guy. So I think he showed he's ready. He's a little older prospect too. I think he's 24. So I think it's time to give him the chance. And the thing is, if the lineup performs like it should, you have Tim Anderson, Yohan Moncada, Yasmani Grandal, Eloy Jimenez, Luis Roberts. So you're not counting on Oscar Colas to hit 35 home runs and hit 300 in his first year. He's just got to be himself, play his way. And the good thing for them is he is a center fielder defensively. He can play center field. Played a lot of center field last year, but will be playing right field for the Sox. So you have that defensive combination of Robert and Colas will be outstanding in center field and right.
Correct. So
that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because one of the knocks that people who don't know anything like me say is that they don't know what he is as an outfielder. Is he? Right. You're saying that he's more than adequate to play right field.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the minor league shows, you'll see for sure what happens when they come to the majors. That's the biggest hit. But yeah, what he's shown so far, he can certainly handle himself defensively out there.
That's cool. That's cool. So let's switch a little bit to pitching now and starting pitching, because as you said earlier, Giolito, he had an off year, and we were wondering what could be the key to the turner to for him to have a turnaround. Was he doing something different, or that was detected by the staff, or I don't know, anything mechanics or anything, or just simply one of those off years that pitchers sometimes have.
I think it was just an off year. I think at certain starts his velocity was a little down, but this is a guy you're talking about who the previous 3 years, excuse me, was as good as that he started in the American League.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let me stop one more time. Let me just get that.
No worries.
Sorry.
No worries.
This is easily fixable. Don't worry.
Okay. It's the whoops.
There you are.
Freaking sinuses and throat.
Oh, God.
My flu.
Yeah,
So.
coming out of the flu is just the word.
Yeah, and Chicago winter really helps. So
Yeah, I guess so.
Hasn't been bad the last few days though.
no, you're right. No,
That's the perks of living in Costa Rica, man.
There you go. Is that where you are? That's great.
Yeah. All
right, so
Carlos
what
is
were
a
we
jerk. Yeah.
I mean,
We were talking about Giolito and
Oh yeah, and you have to understand that Giolito's also this is his last year of being arbitration eligible. So he'll be a free agent most likely unless something is worked out with the Sox. Assuming both sides can come to an understanding. So he'll be a free agent after 23. So yeah, I mean it's always look at what Rodon did. Before he he had a great season. Giolito works his tail off. He's a kind of a student of the game, almost kind of like a professor of the game. I don't know if he'd laugh if he heard me say that, but really, wants to find out the ins and outs. So I can tell you he's working hard. Ethan Katz told us, the pitching coach, Lucas is working hard in California. So, he didn't take it lightly. He was not happy, but it happened. So again, you got to move forward and hope that, the 3 years were more of what he's about and that last year was just an off season and he'll be able to get it back together. And I think the Sox believe that. Sox have, when they make the Clevinger signing official, the Sox have a really good rotation. It's all right-handed, but Cease, Giolito, Lynn, Kopech, and Clevinger is a pretty good group with Davis Martin, kind of waiting in the wings there after a pretty decent run last year for the Sox.
I would agree with you on that. And, one thing I wanted to ask you, Scott, too, Twitter, everybody's an expert on Twitter when it comes to their favorite team, but there's a lot of chatter of fans, people calling for the trading of Lucas Giolito, and I don't see that being a possibility at this time. Do you? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I think the only reason you do it is if you really felt like this was going to be the last year with him and you got something really solid in return. And, but I mean, you're obviously trading low based on last year, based on 2022. Now, I think Lucas is a prime starter. I think he's a, top of the rotation. Probably won't be opening day this year because what Cease did last year, but still, an opening day starter a couple times over. I think he's still right up there. So, yeah, I mean, I think, Jerry Reinsdorf once joked at the winter meetings that the only guy he ever had that was untradeable wore 23 for the Bulls. So, they traded Chris Sale, for God's sake. So anyone can be moved. And I think if the right offer is there, you may see. I think you're more likely to see a trade involving Giolito than Dylan Cease, for example, because Lucas is in his last year and just trying to figure out if he's going to be here beyond that. But I still think he'll be. My guess right now, as we're sitting here taping this now, is that he'll be part of the rotation opening day. But that could change in a week when we're in San Diego.
For sure.
And we have the deal of the day, Mike Clevinger now. And of course that looks like an awesome fit for Chicago. Although I thought that they were going to look for a left-handed because, as you mentioned, they are pretty much
right.
All right-handed. But I mean, you can do a lot worse than adding Clevinger, right?
Yeah, Clevinger's will be another year removed from his Tommy John surgery. He had a little bit of a knee issue last year, and he struggled in the playoffs. But just some people I know who know him, he seems like a really kind of upbeat, knowledgeable character. And maybe that's what the Sox needed in that clubhouse. Maybe the Sox were missing that last year. You know, one of the guys who brings so much energy to that clubhouse on a daily basis is Tim Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
And he was hurt, you know, from I guess like August 5th on, he didn't play last year. So you notice his absence when he's gone. You notice him not being there. So maybe you need a guy like Clevinger. And besides that, Clevinger's a pretty good pitcher when, you know, healthy. And now I know his strikeout rate dropped last year and his velocity dropped a little bit. But again, it's 1 year out of Tommy John. First year of pitching out of Tommy John. Sox were very strongly after him in 2020. From what I remember, you know, they tried to get him offering Madrigal and Dunning, and it did not work out. I don't think Cleveland was probably real keen on trading Mike Clevinger within the division. And look who Cleveland got in that deal. You know, I mean, Cleveland got like not literally, but like a quarter of their playoff team came from San Diego in that deal. Naylor, was Jimenez in that deal possibly? I know Arias was. Hedges ended up being a very nice catcher. Yeah. So it's and Quantrill, who was their number 3 guy, right, for most of the year behind Bieber and McKenzie. So I think it's you know, once it becomes official, it's a nice pickup for them. It's a good kind of as the you know the analytic people would say, it's a good 1 year prove it deal for Mike Clevinger.
Right. The only bad thing about Clevinger is that he will give me a seizure watching him pitch or with all that, you know. Oh my God, that's so. I feel.
But he does it with great hair, Carlos. He does it with great hair.
I think he has wilder hair than I do right now. So
that's awesome.
He'll have that over me for sure.
Scott, you know, you talked a little bit earlier about the bullpen, and I think you know there was a lot of bad vibes thrown around by casual fans again towards the bullpen last year, which actually performed pretty well most of the year. How do you see that shaking out for them this year? I mean, I know Garrett Crochet is going to be back at some point from injury, and Ethan Katz, I think, maybe in an interview with you, even had said that he was probably going to be in the bullpen,
right?
And now obviously they won't need him as a starter with the guys that they have lined up. How do you see this shaking out with him and guys like Ronaldo Lopez? Well, obviously, we know Hendriks is the closer. They've got Bummer, Joe Kelly, Graveman. Is it possible that they trade from that surplus to try to fill another hole somewhere? A lot of rumor has been, and you would know better than me, obviously, but that they're kind of coming up to where they're comfortable salary-wise, and maybe within $10 or $15 million of where that could be. Do you see them trading from that to maybe try to fill another hole, or do you think that they're going to leave that bullpen intact?
Yeah, you never know on the Sox of their budget because they seem, if they need someone, they find the room to kind of get them. But Rick Hahn did tell reporters in the GM meetings, which I was not at for that you know it seemed more likely trades than free agency to fill the needs, and they already did go one through free agency with Clevinger. I think the vibes on the bullpen last year, I think people liked the bullpen they had. I think they just were kind of maybe a little, not miffed, but a little curious that there was so much money invested in the bullpen, you know? Mm-hmm. And, yeah, I think they could make a move and still be strong. You know, Crochet will be back at some point. And as Ethan Katz said in that Zoom with us that he probably will not be a starter this year, but I think he'll be in that Kopech hybrid role where, you know, he'll go a little longer at times. He'll probably get some spot starts here and there, and that'll build the innings up. You know, he didn't pitch last year, so it's kind of hard without any starting experience to send him in and saying, you're a starter now. You know, I know that's what he wants to do, and I know the Sox would like him to do that, but it's kind of hard to jump him into that. But, yeah, there's some room there. You know, I mean, you have a good group. I mean, Lopez was a revelation of the bullpen, and Ethan Katz said he really thinks now that Lopez wants to be a closer more than return to the rotation. So, you have one, if not the game's best closer in the top 3 or 4 in Liam Hendriks, Kendall Graveman and Aaron Bummer, great setup guys. Joe Kelly, Garrett Crochet, you know, Ronaldo Lopez, Jimmy Lambert had a nice year. Jose Ruiz is good in kind of non-high leverage roles. So it's a deep bullpen, and you have other guys coming up, you know, younger guys coming up. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. You know, I don't know how active they'll be in San Diego, but they certainly have some options to maneuver.
It's interesting.
Let's go to the favorite talk around the White Sox for Mike, second base. So obviously Leury Garcia, what didn't work. But what are the options for the Sox? Lenin Sosa, Romy Gonzalez. What? It certainly looks like they should be looking for a second baseman somewhere. But maybe Segura is too expensive, or they. But there are some options. Do you think they will reach for one?
Yeah, I mean, right now, like you said, you have Leary, who's got 2 more years left, counting this one. You have Romy Gonzalez, who played very well last year. I think he had a little bit of a slow finish, but really kind of showed his ability for a good stretch there. Sosa did not do, I think he was 4 for 35 in the major league level, but also his first experience. And he was kind of up and down a couple times. Look at his minor league numbers, and he was great. Now you got to do it at the major league level, right? You don't get any credit. You don't get any bonus points carried up to the majors if you're good in the minors. So he's there too. But if you're looking for a left-handed bat, I know people keep talking about after Hunter Renfroe was traded by Milwaukee, will the Brewers trade Colton Wong? But he's also, I believe his option was picked up for $10 million, right? So you're not getting him for free. So, I mean, what can you add a $10 million guy in second and then still fill in left field and, whatever else you need to add? You may need to add a couple outfielders. So I think second base could be internal, but I also think it's an area where you could go for a left-handed bat. So we'll see I don't know about, Segura certainly would be a guy that would make sense as well, too. Good veteran presence on a team that wants to win. But they do have a couple options who have played quite frequently. And, you feel bad for Leary Garcia because the guy had a pretty decent season, I think, in 21.
Yes, he did.
Just from the start last year was just bad. And he, talked about it a couple times. He just was not good. And then on top of it, you have the 3-year, was it $15.5 million deal for him. He's now, far and away the longest tenured guy, I think, in the White Sox. And I think if he plays out this deal, this is his 11th year with the White Sox, I want to say. I think it's 12 years he plays out all 3. But, he shouldn't be – the idea was not for him to get 500 bats in a season. It's, 300, 320, something in there. So I think if you use him in that role and play him all over, he can play short, he can play third, he can play second. He plays all the outfield. He's pitched for him, for God's sake. So,
right.
he can do a little bit of everything. But I think he was kind of emblematic for fans as, just this is why the team's bad. And it really wasn't just him. It was a whole big thing that just went wrong last year. But he did not have a good season. So I know he's better than what he was last year. And he knows he's better than what he was last year.
Well, and they used him in the super utility role when he was really successful in 21, and God knew that bomb that he hit against Houston in the playoffs is still traveling. That ball was killed. I was at that game. It was pretty wild. And I think he just got overexposed last year just because of all the injuries. He had to play more than what he was used to playing. And I think back in the super utility role, he's a very useful guy on that team. So, Carlos, I'm going to defend him. I know that you're not used to me doing that, but I'm going to
this is breaking news, Mike.
It's the Christmas season. It's the Christmas season, so we're going to do that.
Funny.
So Scott, we're getting into the home stretch here. Thank you again for your time, everybody. Here we're here with Scott Merkin and the senior writer at MLB.com. I can't imagine anyone's been there longer than you have. So it's been our pleasure to have you on tonight. We had a couple of really fast questions that we kind of wanted to end with here for you. A couple of fun ones as well.
Sure.
Can you think, is there a minor leaguer besides Colas that we talked about that you think has a chance to make a mark in the 2023 season and beyond?
So, Colson Montgomery had a great year last year for the Sox. Their top pick from I guess it was 2 drafts ago, right? Or was it last year? No, it was 2 drafts ago. Everything runs together for me at this point. But, yeah, because the kid from Oswego was the pitcher. Noah Schultz was last year.
Right.
So 2 years ago. And I remember, I'd done a story on him and talked to some people. When I posted the story, some people from his area contacted me and said, hey, just so you know, this kid was a pro player when he was playing high school, basketball and baseball in Indiana. Let's face it, high school basketball in Indiana is pretty much being in the pros, right? So I mentioned that to Chris Getz during an interview last year, and Chris Getz looked like I asked him for money. He was like, and Chris is the best, a fellow Wolverine like myself. And, I think he was kind of like, slow the boat a little bit here. He didn't say that. He's very proper in interviews, but he kind of looked at me like, let's get him through to Charlotte and see what he does there. But, I think that's a guy who could make a quick jump. I think Sean Burke, who's a pitcher, is someone who could make a move quickly. Carlos Perez may be in the picture, got a little bit of time last year, depending on how they want to go catching wise. So again, most of their guys are still a little ways away. Yoelqui Cespedes, where does he stand now with Colas making the move up? Is Yoelqui a guy who could be a utility, like a a fourth outfielder, fifth outfielder type of guy. So, there's some guys in the upper level, but there's also some guys I think who are they're higher end guys. I got a little grief because in the the winter meetings preview, I said their system is starting to get noticed a little bit for some of the upside they have and the younger guys, even though the system is still ranked low. But you can have good players, even though your system overall is not ranked high. And I think guys are starting to show a little bit that it's not as barren as people think. But I'm not sure, aside from the guys I mentioned, who will jump up next year. Next year is really a team, designed to win. Make the playoffs, maybe, contend for a World Series. So you take what you can get in terms of the younger guys, but I think Colas is the main one who's going to help them at the outset.
Makes total sense. So, Scott, you've been covering the White Sox for almost half of your life, I would say, right? So, who is your?
I'm saying that's very nice of you. That's very nice of you, but a little less.
I always shoot less, So, who would you say is your favorite player that you've covered in that time? Who the most fun guy? Maybe the guy that you really enjoyed the most, if anyone.
Well, I mean, it's hard to say, and it's kind of unfair to say. Not that really any player I think is going to call me and say, "Hey, you didn't name me." I'm sure they have other things to do, but I'd have to put like a team together. Like I still talk to AJ. AJ still gives me grief about Michigan sports. I remember the day that Michigan lost to Appalachian State, who won a national title that year, by the way, in football. The Sox were in Cleveland, and I was there, and just was incessantly ribbed by him for Michigan. He's a big Florida guy.
Right,
he's pretty bad this year. And so Brian Anderson was a great guy to deal with. Chris Sale, tremendous dude. Jose Abreu. One thing about Jose Abreu that I always found interesting is Jose Abreu can speak, English, but he chooses to do the interview through the great interpreter they have, Billy Russo. And I understand that. He wants to be comfortable in his, but you always got the feel, and I know a little bit of Spanish, not enough to do an interview, but a little bit to understand. But even without that, you always got the feel of what he was saying, even through an interpreter. He was that kind of passionate of a guy that you understood when he was pissed, understood when he was happy about something, or understood where he was like kind of just proud of what they did. So many guys, Mark Burley, Paul Konerko, there's just, great guys. I really have been lucky in that, I don't want to jinx it, but that in, now the 21st season, there haven't been a lot of bad guys that I've dealt with in the time, but those are just a few of them. And, I'm thankful for all of them who were easy to deal with. Aaron Bummer has been great. I talked to him a lot about Big Ten football. Jake Berger has been a great story to cover with what he's gone through to get to where he is. Gavin Sheets was great this year. So, we could do another 10 minutes just on stories about the different guys I covered. So I can't really name one, but there's a group right there.
Wow, that's awesome. Well,
Adam Dunn. I can't forget Adam Dunn, too. He was outstanding.
Yeah, he always seemed like he was a really funny guy. You just go into the games and the way he interacted with fans, he seemed like he didn't take himself too seriously. He was a great guy. That's cool. Well, Scott, we've taken about 45 minutes of your time, and we know that you're not feeling 100%, so we really appreciate you jumping on with us and talking about the White Sox. My first love is the White Sox. I grew up about 10 minutes away from the original Comiskey Park and now live in the far western suburbs, but I just try to get down there for 5-10 games a year. Tell us a little bit about where we can find your work and plug anything that you're working on right now and let people know where they can find you on Twitter.
Sure, MLB.com, WhiteSox.com. And at Scott Merkin on Twitter right now. And then, coming up, it'll be winter meetings starting, good Lord willing, starting Sunday and going through Wednesday's Rule 5 draft, which I think is about 4 o'clock Chicago time. So it's shortened this year. Usually it starts on a Sunday, ends on a Thursday, so they've cut one day off the event this year. I think there are some people who are actually leaving Wednesday morning because of the fact that the Rule 5 is fun. It's a great experience, but a lot of the contending teams don't do much in the major league portion of it. So, you can actually go without missing a ton of stuff there. So anyways, but, it's something to watch for sure. People do have interest in that. So that's where you can find it. Check me out. Various podcasts, radio interviews, and TV interviews across the area. But that's where you can find me steady at WhiteSox.com, MLB.com, and at Scott Merkin.
All right. Well, Scott, thanks again for your time. We're going to take
guys.
We're going to take a quick break right now, and we'll be back with you in a few moments.